Hi, and welcome back to the Toronto International Film Festival. And thanks for joining us for one of our two Q&A sessions with the directors of films here in Shortcuts program for TIFF. My name is Jason Anderson, and I'm the programming for Shortcuts. And I'm thrilled to be joined by four of the filmmakers we have in the program. I'm stoked. I'm just going to use the word stoked today. And I'd like to have each of them introduce themselves and say which film they're here with, and just sort of working around my clockwise direction. I'll start with Seth.
Seth A. Smith, and I made a rotoscoped animated short film called Dust Path.
Thanks. And Gabriel.
Hi, my name is Gabriel, and I directed the short film Motorcyclist Happiness Won't Fit into His Suit.
Hey, thanks. And Adeyemi.
Adeyemi Michael, director of The Future Isn't What It Used to Be, which is a sci-fi.
And thanks so much. And Rakan.
Okay, so hi Jason, hi everyone. My name is Rakan Mayasi, and I'm a Palestinian filmmaker living in Lebanon, and I'm going to talk about my film Trumpets in the Sky.
Great. And as I said, I'm stoked. I am totally stoked to have you all here because the films are fantastic, and we're so thrilled to have them, to get the chance to share them with the audiences here. And all such different films, all very distinctive, all very powerful. And all, and I think I think all your very personal work too. And I'd love to hear from each of the filmmakers just to talk about how these films began and kind of, what some of those original inspirations were, and ultimately why they felt so compelled to tell these stories. And start with Seth.
I guess I live in the country and I have some free-range backyard hens, and I spend a lot of time with them, and I kind of pick up on their little habits and behaviors and language, and I've always thought it'd be neat to make a subtitled film about, just what their, thoughts on. And basically, they have two kind of major concerns, and one is survival and one is food. And I just thought it would be interesting to do a subtitled film that kind of imagined what their thoughts were on that subject. And also, I've been developing a rotoscoped animated feature, so I kind of wanted a project to test out the process just to see what I was getting myself into.
Oh, wow. I'm sure it got complicated. That's great. And Gabriel.
Yes, thanks, Jason. In our case, I think it all began with an experience that me and Stephanie Reinhardt, who is a cinematographer and co-writer, had once we were in a parking lot in a shopping mall in Poland, when out of the blue, a group of 20 or more motorcyclists entered the parking lot, and they started to make this sort of spectacle. And it was for us really interesting because there was no one there to make the spectacle for. And it was not like they were practicing or trying stuff or something. It was very obviously like they were showing off, but there was not the proper audience for their spectacle. And me, who I have zero interest with motorcycles, I was kind of fascinated of the fact that they were really wanting me to see them, even when it was very clear that I was not really understanding what they were doing. And for me, that sort of stayed with us, because it came this feeling like that there was a weird thing about vanity in this sense that was actually an act of generosity, because they were really offering themselves, not depending of what expectations their audience would have, not to feed their audience's taste, but just to show themselves, to kind of offer themselves to the others. So it was kind of, for me, it was like a weird provocative idea, this one, that being vain is actually a way of being generous when you're genuinely vain. And and that experience kind of stayed with us. And when I came back to Mexico a few years later, it felt like this way of seeing at other people was, and that other people's beauty was, it seemed to me like a interesting key, or a way to deal with the whole race, class, history problem that is all over the place in my country. So it was kind of interesting, because you never really know what's the proper code between classes, between social classes here in Mexico. And somehow that experience gave me like a key of something that I felt that was important to explore.
It's amazing. Oh yeah, I could really see a lot of that in the film, which is so unique. And also hear from Adeyemi about the future, which is like this pretty astonishing, ambitious piece as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jason. So yeah, the future, I guess it started with a conversation I had with my producer in, I think, 2019. She had put together this sort of collection of directors. Essentially, it's a film that's actually part of an anthology about Black people in the future in the UK, and what's going to happen. So essentially, she put together a group of writers, directors, and one of the writers was a guy called Courtney Newland. And Courtney had written a script, and they showed it to me, and were like, "Look, what do you think?" And I was like, I feel like I could make, a silent sci-fi film based on Black people. And really, what grabbed me was the fact that I feel like at the time I was making this transition from documentary into fiction. My background is documentary. I've worked in documentary for over sort of 10 years, and the film, the future, were all documentary, or sort of like riffs on genre and form, and trying to play with the idea of fiction versus documentary, and let me try my hand at fiction. And I feel like during the process of the pandemic, this film became even much more clear for me. Themes and issues that the film is dealing with is really about sort of isolation, community, partnership, loneliness, all the things that a lot of us have experienced in the last year. And funnily, week that we went into lockdown, but that didn't happen. And so, a massive part of me wanting to make this film became more affirmed during the pandemic, because we shot in like September last year. And so throughout that process, I was able to sort of like galvanize and grab feelings and emotions that I was also experiencing, during the pandemic. I was living alone in London throughout the first half of it. And, the film really deals with this idea of like, what will happen, if, and it's actually quite a realistic threat, which is an issue for us in the world. And the film deals with that. It deals with the fact that the world has been ravaged by climate change. And, imagine if there is nobody else left, what will we do, and how will we be able to cope, essentially? And so it really became something that resonated even further during the make. And so it was a joy to make, and a joy to sort of tell the story from that perspective.
Oh God, yeah, so much of that reads so strongly in the film, for sure. It's definitely what we would call COVID adjacent, I think is one term we like. So, it captures a lot about that experience for sure. And same to Rakan, because again, it's interesting thinking about how some of these, certainly that documentary narrative, that thin line, which is a thin line in many of these films, certainly a very thin line in Trumpets. And I'd love to hear how this film began.
Well, there's more than one point, actually. The first being that my grandmother was forced to get married when she was 14 years old. And since I was a child, whenever I talked to her, she's always telling me about this story. And I grew up finding this idea just horrible, pure horrible. And, until this day, she always tells me about the story. And she falls into tears and, the whole thing. So I always wanted to explore this idea. But there's especially, a few years ago, I was camping with a friend of mine, and we were driving back to the city, and we saw this big truck, and it was filled with the girls who work on the farms and the fields, and they all looked, older than they were. So if she was 13, 12, 14, she'd look 20 because of the sun and the work and everything. And that idea really struck me, because also this community, the Syrian workers in the Lebanese farms, they, regardless if they were refugees or not refugees, because not all of them are refugees, mind you, most of them, they do practice this idea, underage marriage, forced marriage, however we call it, sold marriages. And so I wanted to explore. So I have an idea, and I didn't want to make a classical narrative film. I also wanted to put it in a contextual, anthropological issue, like a context, I would say. And I found that this was the most interesting part, to actually teeter between this and that, and also, with the war in Syria, this subject really surfaced. It was around all the time. Everyone was talking about this, whether it was, female trafficking or sold marriages because of the poverty and so on. But it's also related to tradition. So not only it is related to this war and stuff, but also it surfaced. So all of these ideas got me really, it was also a part of a feature project. It was a bigger film, and this was one of the stories. But then as I went by, I realized this doesn't work with the entire project. So I said, okay, this could live like an entity all alone. And I said, let's just make a film. I've been writing for a few years now. I don't want to write. I want to go, take a camera, write with the camera. So I didn't want dialogues at all. And, just took this kind of shape and form, honestly.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks so much for sharing the film too, especially after Bon Bonnet, which we had at Shortcuts, and was a fantastic film too. So, but yeah, it's just on this topic, because I'd love to go to everyone and sort of talk more about the sort of process of making the films and that, and how they kind of attain these amazing lives. And yeah, I was starting with Gabriel, just because of this sort of, again, that sort of thin line between documentary and narrative, and I just love to hear about like finding these subjects and finding these people who I'm presuming are kind of playing versions of themselves in kind of a scenario that the film explores and portrays. And it is like, again, they obviously bring so much energy to this piece. I'd love to hear about kind of the process of getting to know them and working with them.
Yes. Thanks, Jason. Yes. Actually, it happens a lot that when people ask me about this, most people think the motorcyclist is a non-actor, but in the case of the film, the actual motorcyclist is an actor, a really good actor who is right now like starting to appear in more and more movies here in Mexico, and I really hope he does well, because he's a wonderful guy. And the rest of the kids, they are just neighbors of this area where we shot, and the point, I think, the interest in having these two, I'm sometimes a bit feeling there's not much left to say with all this discussion about non-actors and actors. Is not really like a thing that I'm super interested per se, let's say. But in this case, there was this thing that you should be able to see which things were artificial and which things were going away from my control, no? Because it's all about my imposing an image on the world. It's not the image that the world really has, no? Like this motorcyclist doesn't really exist. So I'm kind of making my own fantasy, and it should not pretend that it is their reality. It's more the way I'm trying to understand something that is not me. So the kids were, in that sense, great, because they would be breaking the film constantly. Like they were. I'm pretty much a control freak, and I have. I'm very bad at improvisation and things like this. And the wonderful thing was that the kids would bring all of these things that I just could not control. That would break this sort of super strict formality of the movie and strict formality of the shots. And we were kind of aiming, although not really knowing if it was going to happen, to find this friction between these two things. I hope it happens to some degree, that you see kind of the reality, like flowing under the artificiality and somehow rebelling against it to some degree. Although I'm not completely sure it happens, I'm hoping this. And it was a bit what was because I feel that one of the themes of the movie is how do you negotiate with otherness, no? So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Well, that's great. I think and definitely it's definitely there in the film, and it's actually an interesting segue to the future isn't what it used to be, because you do have this sort of, kind of high concept, high design aspect, sort of pushing against a really kind of raw documentary, like very lived in aesthetic. And I'd love to hear about the sort of process of kind of world building, or actually, it's sadly already a lot of our world already, but like kind of extrapolation, and also that just to kind of to create this universe of this film that also make it feel very lived in and raw.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, when it comes to sort of my documentary background, there is elements from that sort of like real space that I'm sort of channeling in the film. And, I feel from a production design point of view, because it was the first time I was doing this, like building out this type of world and, working with a production designer in this way. Typically, I'm going to a location and we're trying the location to do the work. I feel like a large part of the work for the language of the film was about us really being specific, about where we were going to situate the cryo chamber, situate Amari, who's the person who's been cryopreserved and frozen, and making a sort of clear delineation between her universe and Dez's universe until Dez reached, she is sort of like being preserved in some way. And, when it came to sort of building a cryo chamber, we went to sort of like 3 separate locations. But what we ended up settling on was this college. It was a former Jewish college in I think in Essex. And it allowed us to sort of do everything that would sort of speak to her world in one place. And I think that spoke to Dez's desolate, raw, dead, lifeless world in a quarry in Essex as well. And so, it was separating those 2 spaces. And luckily enough, when we found the space to shoot Amari's world, it gave us those options. We basically didn't have to move location, but it was just about us saying, well, living quarters. We shot in the former dining hall, where they have they have that meal together, that sort of solitary meal of sort of connection and whatnot. And you know, the world building as such was really us just trying to give the all scene facility the language as well. You know, the directions of the corridors. You know, from trying to sort of like give a language to the space. You know, like there's this scene where they sort of cross this amphitheater, and the amphitheater in itself is like is giving us the language that facility, this institution is far bigger than just this one cryo chamber. And so, you know, a large part of us creating the world was using the location that we found. It was really more about that. Prior to that, you know, trying to sort of create a world that is in 2080 on the budget that we were working on is difficult, right? And so you kind of have to be industrious, you know, and that's sort of, I feel like, the strength. Then it's not just the production design. It comes down to the sound. You know, it comes down to, you know, how do we marry the sound design with this space? You know, like how are we making the world that we see? Because before we get to the all scene facility, the world building that we do, we try and show, okay, this world is nothing survives. You see the main character, the first character you see sniffing a dead bird, eating out of a tin can. Like, you know, it's us taking it to the complete extreme that, you know, not even sunlight, you know, sunlight doesn't even exist. And so, you know, a lot of that's also done in the grade, you know. And so, you know, I feel like it's a combination of these things. Even when, you know, the choice of shots that we've used, you know, before we get to the all scene facility, the script was actually 10 pages long, okay? And because that was purely description, essentially, we had to sort of like, you know, find ways of telling the story through the imagery, because, you know, it's not a film where you can shoot, there is no dialogue. You know, I think I saw that in Rakan's film as well, you know, and there's something that you need to allow things to play out. And so that then that helps us with the world. That helps to aid the location. That helps to sort of like give context to everything that's going, because the only context you get in a film is the year 2080 until you start to see this relationship develop between these two people. So, you know, yeah, I think I've spoken maybe far too much already, but yeah, I mean, it's a combination of all of those things. It's not just the production design.
But it's fascinating. And thanks. I mean, I think that the film really is this, like, it's a very complete piece, you know, like it's just, I mean, there's so much richness and so much detail. And maybe we'll come back to Seth in a sec, but I just looked, I mean, just a natural thread to Rakan, because again, like that use of silence, that use of like the space of the film, I think is so strong and so distinctive about Trumpets, and certainly connects with other films here. And I'd love to hear about the kind of the finding of this space and the casting, because obviously it really is the people we meet in the film are extraordinary, and I don't know if there is professional experience among them or what. So, but if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Well, thanks, Jason. First, I mean, the idea was to make a film that has poetry of the space in the foreground, as opposed to the narrative being in the foreground. So let's put the narrative in the midground or the background, and let's begin watching tableaus, let's say. This was my approach to, actually, I did not write any script. I wrote one paper with a series of events. Bushra does this, she does that, this happens, that's it. Just one line, maybe 8 or 10 scenes, I forgot. And of course, I mean, I wanted to work with non-professional actors because I wanted this collaboration, this combination between the human and the space to be authentic. I did not want to plant my let's say, actors there if they were professional and so on. It had to melt. It had to be organic. It had to be natural. And the only intruders were us, really. This could have gone without the camera, let's say, you know. And this was the approach to the entire film. The casting, it was a bit bizarre because I discovered the seasons and when potatoes are, you know, when they're planted, when they're harvested. I went to the north in May last year, began researching how is this society or this community working? Who are they? Why are they mostly young females? You know, and I began to look at all of them. I cast more than 100 girls until I found this one, who was highly intelligent, very smart, very, very authentic, very genuine girl. She taught me so much, by the way, and all of the cast are non-professional actors. The lady playing her mother is not her mother, really, in real life, but she's her aunt. Her mother passed away in the war, and in the war in Syria, and we had to just bring another, let's say, family member to play this role, and that's how it worked. But also locations. So I was scouting for locations in the same way I was doing the casting, because I wanted initially to have the mountains in every shot. I wanted to have the mountain so that it speaks to us in the sense that there's always an echo, there's always, the horizon is blocked, there's no horizon because she's getting married early and so on. The metaphor, I wanted to really work on the metaphor in every scene or every shot even. And I wanted the sky to be very present. So when we were doing the location scouts, the season of potato harvesting finished where I cast the girl. So they wanted to migrate to another area, which turned out to be for the best of the film, because the other area, the Biqa' Valley, it's a beautiful place surrounded by mountains all through. So wherever you put your camera, you have a mountain. And you know, it was just the season of harvesting potatoes there. And I wanted potatoes specifically, not onions or any other vegetable, you know, because of the size of it, because of the color of it, and the way it is in the underground. You cannot see it until the truck has to pass, and it brings out the potatoes, and the girls go and pick it up. So this is how the film, my approach to this film actually was.
It is really amazing, and that's. I think just to we got a few moments left, but I'd love to hear from Seth, because given there's an agricultural connection now too, to sort of think about sort of shifting into again like a kind of, I mean, for as fanciful as Dust Bath may seem initially, it's also very grounded in the real, I guess, partially out of the rotoscoping. But it's up to you to talk a bit about that, how that film kind of the look developed and how that came to be.
Yeah, I guess it's a documentary in some ways. Yeah. No, it is. I mean, I do really, I mean, I am pretty fascinated by how chickens, just their whole social life. A lot of people just see chickens as total stupid animals. I think Herzog said chickens are the stupidest animals in the world or something. but they're actually, I would say my chickens are, you know, have, you know, maybe not as smart as a cat, but they have those kind of social interactions that, you know, I have a friendly one, a kind of a mean jerk chicken, and stay away from them. But yeah, no, I just, the making a film, it was a lot different for me from other films. It was pretty relaxing, actually, which was a nice change. There wasn't a whole lot of stress. So, but it was just me hanging out with these chickens and spending time with them, filming them, and I guess I kind of had a rough story in mind when I was doing it, but I really didn't write a script until after it was all finished, which is kind of a first time for me. But, you know, my film's a lot shorter than all of your films, so it gets 2 minutes. So I get to, you know, 2 minutes, you can really experiment without too many repercussions. And but yeah, I just filmed it and put it together in editing, and then just casually, you know, spent a season rotoscoping. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's just animating over live action film, so it's tracing over it, but you have some certain liberties, and I really like it because it's becomes a hybrid of animation and live action, and it's kind of like illustrated live action. And I don't know, for some reason I just thought it would lend itself well. I've also been experimenting with painting in film. I just finished I have a feature in festivals right now that I did a lot of matte painting backgrounds, and it's something that I'm always trying to make my films a little dreamier, and just matte paintings and any illustrated elements help me kind of bring a little surrealism and try to make it a little less real. Sometimes I try to get away from reality a bit because my life is pretty real sometimes.
It's I hear you. But again, Sarah, we don't have more time because I'm fascinated about all your films, and there's so much in all of the pieces, and we're again so excited to be able to share them with audiences here at Shortcuts. So thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to viewers for being with us too. So again, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.